What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Cult of Recreationalism podcast. It's a one-on-one show today with me and Sean. If you're watching, if you're on audio, just so you know, it's me and Sean. Um, this kind of came about. Actually, I'll kind of give a little backstory of how we got here. Today's going to be some stories about Glen that Sean's going to share. Initially, when we started this podcast, we started an episode of how Bubs got started, and Sean started that with, well, to know that you need to know about Bub. And so he started telling some Bub stories, and it just kind of kept going. And it was an amazing episode. It was really cool. And like Sean cut in and you can interject here, but it was a really cool episode. And he's like, there are so many more where that came from. So we wanted to have just a show where you just tell some cool Glen stories where people can learn more about the namesake of Bubs.
Yeah. And I would say there's a ton of stories in Glen that kind of go with the like, oh my God, he was such an inspiration. He was my best friend. He was so many different things. And then there's the kind of like mischievous fuck off stories.
And that's what I want to hear.
And these are more geared around that. So if you're looking to like get the well-rounded picture, this is that part of the more well-rounded side.
Yeah. Because I feel like
that was it. Like we did that first intro and I started just dropping these little stories in and I was like, well, there's so many more. I literally spent maybe 3 minutes of prep to get ready for this show.
3 more than me.
And I came up with 11 stories that were just like top of mind. Like, oh, I don't even have to think too much. Mm-hmm. My original thought was to go back to different friends from different chapters and ask them for their stories because I was in most of them, but kind of get their perspective. And then I decided that's a future episode. That's down the line stuff.
Yeah.
So for this one, we can just let it rip.
Yeah. And so, because all the stories we've told so far are like Glen, the hero, Glen, the people who laid down his life to save others. And I want to hear stories about Glen, the hitchhiker who went to, like, those are the kind of stories that I want. And I know you've got one about Alaska that you threw out, just top of mind, but yep. Yeah, let's start off. Do you have any stories like
There's 3 chapters to the Alaska story.
Do you want to start there or do you want to start like younger?
I'm going to go younger. So I'm going to go chronologically. So try and remember, like setting the stage, like everyone can remember back to high school. I had an older brother and my older brother was Glen's best friend. And there was this whole group of core boys. We call them the boys, so just Du Bois. And Du Bois was, Robin Richardson, Chad Haskell, Phil Saban, Charlie Shannon, Glenn, Guy, and like Robin Richardson and all these guys are just these core community of friends. And there's so many more to mention that the list kind of goes on and on. But that group, with the exception of Glenn, obviously, like we're all still incredibly tight, running a text thread, 30 some odd years later, looking back at all of our times together and future memories and planning events. So it's a very core group. So it really starts with them. So, and I might be butchering part of this, in which case any one of them can call me out for accuracy issues. But my first story is going to come in the form of a question, Nathan. Okay. And that is, of all the animals that you would want to name a painting company after, what is the one you would choose last? Of all the animals that you could choose, what would you not choose for like a painting company? House painting company, like a company that's going to go out and paint your house.
Yeah. I immediately want to name it after my dog. So I'm going to go like the opposite, like a bird or something like that.
Okay. So Glenn and Robin and my brother Guy, and I think Brian Romer was a part of it too, another buddy from high school, decided to name their painting company to go around the neighborhood and solicit people to paint their houses. And they wanted to call it, and did call it, Terrapin Painters. Now, a terrapin is a type of tortoise. Turtle. So it inspires slow movement, not speed.
Is that just a Northeast? I know the Maryland Terrapins is that where the name came from?
It actually came from the Grateful Dead.
Okay.
So they were all kind of like high school deadheads. And, we're, just dabbling in that whole like, hey, man, we're going to hacky sack in the common and all that good stuff. And I was the younger brother into speed metal and like just, wanted to listen to punk rock and thrash and all that stuff and skateboard. And these guys were, they're still experimenting with, new age music. But yeah, the predominant voice in the room was Terrapin Painters after a Grateful Dead album that had like a turtle on the front of it. And I was just like, I remember like being young and a smartass and being like, is that really a good idea, guys? They painted houses one summer. I think the only houses that they landed were Robin's parents' house and maybe, one other one. So it was definitely an act of mercy. I will not say that best practices were ensued. There was certainly no health insurance, life insurance, or any kind of property damage insurances. But yeah, we all painted houses for various chapters of our teenage lives, and it was
Nice.
I mean, you learn a lot because like you're up on a ladder, it's hot as balls, and you just got a lot of work to do. So there's nothing glamorous about painting a house, other than it looks really cool when you're done if you do a good job.
Mm.
And the boys all did a really good job, and we all literally all did it. And we used to run around just be like, "Born to paint. That's what we do. We're born to paint." And I remember after years, Glenn and I swore ourselves off of painting houses. We're like, oh, I fucking hate painting.
Never again.
Absolutely burned out on it. So that was it. Don't ever call your house painting company Terrapin Painters. I think that's just business 101 on that one. Well, the next story is kind of a rollout of that. And this is kind of a testament to Glenn's sense of fiscal responsibility. In those teenage years, we were all, like learning about the value of money and your first jobs and, how to have a savings account. Glenn was light years ahead of all of us. Like he had a bank account immediately. He had a paper route when he was, in the 8th grade, or earlier, like he always had money and he wasn't rich. He just saved his money. He was frugal from day one. He just always had cash and he was always willing to lend his friends money. Like, think about that. Like a buddy who's just always there and he's willing to loan you money.
Yeah.
And Glenn earned a nickname, BOG, the Bank of Glen. And that was like well established from his teenage years on all the way through our ski bum years. Glenn was always loaning money to his homies. And
was he loaning it or like with interest
loaning?
Or
No, he always had interest. The interest was so nominal. I remember like he loaned our buddy Marty like a couple $1,000s to buy a truck because Glenn would have the money and Marty couldn't get a loan, like he wouldn't get approved for anything like that. And it wasn't much. It was an old beat up pickup truck, but Glenn would have the money. Glenn would be like, I'll loan you the money for that. And I think he charged him like a one-time interest fee of like a couple $100. Like it was nothing.
Yeah.
And Marty took like 3 years to pay him back. Sorry, Marty, but you did. You ran that one up as long as you possibly could.
Might have missed some payments.
Glenn was that reliable, stable force. Like, despite the fact that we were all maniacs and moving around and doing so many different odd jobs, Glenn always squirreled his way and always knew what to do. The rest of us were like scraping quarters out of the couch cushions to grab meals when we were ski bumming. And Glenn was always like, nope, I'm working my hours. I've got my bank account. And he was just always squared away.
Mm-hmm.
Now that is juxtaposed against some of the jobs that he chose to do. So probably the most colorful job that Glenn did during those teenage years and early years was he decided to take some of the money that he already had to fund a little adventure, but his adventure was a job. Glenn and my brother Guy decided one summer that they were going to tour with the Grateful Dead.
Mm.
And their business plan.
How old was he at this point?
19.
Okay.
18, 19, like right in that,
okay.
Right out of high school. Because I drove them to the side of the freeway, dropped them off at the side of the highway so they could get out of my car with their backpacks, which had all of their worldly belongings in it, so that they could hitchhike to a Grateful Dead concert. And that was the start of their summer adventure of following the Grateful Dead on tour, selling peanut butter sandwiches in the parking lot. And their business plan was to sell enough peanut butter sandwiches to hungry Grateful Dead fans to then pay for the next ticket to the next concert at the next city, and then just keep rolling it forward. Very little on profit margin, very high on quality of experience.
Yeah.
Very high.
Yeah.
And they did it. Like literally, like they roll back in, like, 6 weeks later, just a little bit more frazzled, desperately in need of a shower, but rich in experience.
Were they, so they're rich in experience, like, did they just break even on that whole process? Or did they make a little bit?
I never got a financial statement. I'm going to say it was a full break even. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they came back with exactly what they put into it.
I mean, I feel like for that experience, like, that's a win.
Yeah, you're living cost free for 6 weeks. You've mitigated all of your outside expenses, and you're seeing this great country of ours through the lens of a Volkswagen minibus.
You could like write off the knife that you're spreading all the peanut butter with. Like, I'm thinking of the business expenses here.
Yeah, the plastic knife that you got from the 7-Eleven store in a pinch because you needed some Jiffy. Yeah, that one.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So literally, like, he made an entire summer adventure out of that. But the reason he's able to do stuff like that is because, like, he was always responsible. So, like, when he painted houses after the Terrapin painters, fiasco, he went to work for a real painter, and he was cranking one summer. I mean, he was making so much money because he worked every single day, just hammering through, and made it happen. And that was Glenn. Like, he always knew to work hard, play hard, work hard, play hard, and that was instilled in him from a very young age.
Yeah.
So then we kind of roll from there into the ski bum years. And the first story is actually how Glenn couldn't get a job. So Glenn, Guy, and I, at this point, like, we're all three peas in a pod. We'd all decided, and the story, decided to drop out of college, take a year off, and go be ski bums. And I wanted to go become a professional snowboarder, and Glenn wanted to be a pro skier. Guy just wanted to take a year off and go have some fun. But he was also a ripping skier. So we all went up in October of 1990 to the Snowbird Annual Job Fair. And I'll never forget, Glenn and Guy, fresh off their tour with the Grateful Dead, did not get hired for the job fair. They got denied jobs.
I remember this.
I got hired.
I would say, and you showed up like last minute and got hired, right?
Yeah. I literally like cruised in on a Greyhound bus, rolled up to the job fair. I get a job and they got clipped.
What job did you get?
So I was a baker's assistant.
Okay.
Because I'd worked at a bakery in high school. And like literally my first official paying wage job was a baker's assistant at La Patisserie in Winchester, Massachusetts. And really I was a ditch digger because they had this renovation project out in the back. And I basically shoveled out like this below area so they could put an underground refrigerator in. It was miserable work, like miserable. But whatever, like I didn't care. I was 16, like 15 years old, like just pay me and I'll do some work. And it was right next to the skate park, like where this little spot where we like to skateboard. So I would just like run the wheelbarrow out and then go ride my skateboard around. It was perfect.
Yeah.
But no, so that winter, Glenn and Guy had to work at Alta. So they had to go to the next ski resort up to become lifties. It was phenomenal. I loved it. I was like, you guys couldn't even get a job at Snowbird. But during those years, this is kind of the second part of the story, Glenn, consummate athlete that he was, didn't just ski, even though like he wanted to become a pro skier. He also learned snowboarding. He also learned how to telemark ski. Like his thirst for knowledge to do other sports was unquenchable. So like literally telemark skiing is one of the hardest physical activities that you can do on a mountain, like dropping your knee into a turn And then, the second that whole activity of like, you're basically doing an extended lunge all the way down the mountain. He loved it, like ate it up, figured out how to like, do telemarketing through moguls, and incredibly graceful. Our buddy Andy Lotz, who we went to high school with, he was a little bit older than Glenn and I. Andy, who later founded Nixon Watches, early in his career, he worked for Burton Snowboards as a product guy. And so Andy would send out, board, boots, bindings to Glenn and just have gear at the house to learn how to snowboard and test gear. And Glenn would just be, yeah, sure, I'm going to go figure out how to snowboard. Like, who does that?
Yeah.
Who has a best friend or another friend from high school who just happens to work at the world's largest snowboard company to send you free gear to test out?
Yeah.
Like, to us, it was perfectly normal.
It's like, there's like the ski pass, but then there's also like getting all your gear and equipment. And if you already have all the ski stuff, you're not going to go buy all the snowboard stuff. Like,
right. Exactly. So literally he was a multi-sport athlete. Like the guy, Mike Ritland talked with us. The guy could literally pick up anything and be really good at it really, really fast. And as his best friend, jumping around a little bit, like I made it my life goal to beat him at anything I could. And I didn't succeed. Like throughout our 20s, like never happened. I could snowboard better than him because that's all I did. And I just, I dove so deep into it. But Glenn, for his part, like, pick up fitness routine. He's going to smoke you at it. And I'll never forget, Glenn introduced me to road cycling. And this is like mid 2000s, like 2005. And I borrowed a bike and we went on a ride and I kind of kept up with him. And he pumped me up. He was like, Sean, you got to do this, man. Like, this is your sport. You'd be so good at this. Like, you got a road bike, man. Like, you're natural. And I remember like our third ride together. I smoked him. And he was so pissed. He went from like building me up to, I fucking hate you.
Yeah.
And that was it. I bought a road bike. Like we rode together for years and years and it was just awesome. Like, great adventures, but like literally I would make it my life goal. And then when we both got into CrossFit, of course, like that we're going to be so competitive in that. And I was just like, all I wanted to do was learn things so that, we would have that friendly banter back and forth. Like, like any great set of friendships that you have there. Like, just, you want to beat your buddies and be able to laugh about it afterwards. But anyways, I think one of the consummate stories to talk about is our epic adventure up to Alaska.
Yeah. This is one that you've teased a little bit, but I don't know anything about.
So that first winter when Glenn and Guy didn't get hired to Alta, at the end of that season, we had all the next summer. We hadn't really made huge plans, but around the springtime, snowbird's starting to wind down a little bit. And Glenn and I have this conversation. We're like, well, where are we going to go next? Like, our lease is going to be up on the apartment. We have to give back. We had rented all of our furniture. Like, we got to give it all back. And we literally only had backpacks. And we're like, well, we'd heard stories that you could make a boatload of money on the fishing boats up in Alaska. So we're like, awesome. Let's go to Ketchikan, Alaska, and we'll become fishermen. We'll go to work on the fishing boats. So we get dropped off in North Salt Lake, 2 backpacks, no Grateful Dead peanut butter sandwiches, just me and Glenn. And we decide we're going to go and hitchhike up to Seattle, Washington, which is where Glenn had some relatives in Anacortes, Washington, and Uncle Bob. Glenn's Uncle Bob lived in Anacortes, and we were going to go hitchhike to him, kind of recalibrate. And then from there, we'll catch a ferry up to Alaska and we'll go get a job on a fishing boat and have the most epic summer of just catching fish and living on a boat. Yeah. That was our plan. No experience, just we were going to go do it. So,
2 Massachusetts kids, fishermen, like it makes sense.
Gotta make sense, right? So we leave Salt Lake and we catch like 2 quick rides. Boom, boom. Next thing you know, we're up in Idaho and we end up catching a ride and it's like, it's pretty late at night. Slow going, and this van pulls over, and this old crusty kind of like Vietnam vet guy picks us up, and he's like, "Hey guys, come on in." hey, where are you going? And we're like, oh, we're going to Seattle. And he's like, oh, I'm not going that far, but I'm going pretty darn close. And we're like, that's awesome. Because it was like, we're talking about like an 8-hour block of travel here. And he's like, yeah, hop in, man. Like, I got you covered. So we start driving. And, now it's probably, I don't know, midnight or something. The guy like got a cooler right next to him. It's me and him up front. Glenn's like, man, I'm super tired. I'm gonna rack out back because it was a giant, econo van. And the guy's like, yeah, man, just, roll out there, sleep in the back. So Glenn passes out. And I'm sitting there, guy's like, want a beer? And I'm like, yeah. Drink a beer. 18 years old. Of course I'm going to drink a beer. This guy grabs a beer and he drinks a beer. And then we have another beer. And then he has another beer. And then that goes on for a few hours. And I'm not really thinking anything of it, but I am absolutely lit drunk. And I'm in the passenger seat, and this guy's driving, and he's telling stories and swerving back and forth. And somewhere in there, it's got to be like 4 o'clock in the morning. Glenn wakes up, looks up, and he's like, hey, like, what's going on? And he's like, what's up? He was like, this is great. It's like, excuse me, sir. Can you pull over? Oh, yeah, sure. Pulls over. Sean, get out of the van. I got out of the van, grabs our backpacks. Like, thanks, man, we're good. He's like, well, you sure? We're not even there yet. And we're like, we're totally good, man. Thanks so much. This was awesome. Like, we got to go, though. He's like, all right. Drives off, and Glenn's like, you are a fucking idiot. And I'm like, yeah.
So I made sure he stayed awake. I was riding shotguns. The rules of shotgun.
I totally tried that line. I'm like,
Yeah.
I was doing my job. I made sure he stayed on the road. Glenn's like, dish, dish, dish. So, crawl over to the side of the road, rack out for a few hours, catch a sober ride the rest of the way to Uncle Bob's house. And that was like part one of the adventure up to Alaska. Part two of the adventure up to Alaska includes, and I'm gonna edit this story somewhat. People can DM me if they want to get the rest of it, but it basically includes phase two. Was we decided that the ferry that we were going to take was the best ferry was out of Vancouver in Canada. So we had to get from Anacortes, Washington to Vancouver. So it's only like a 3-hour ride. Uncle Bob, we hang out there, we shower, spend a day with Uncle Bob. It was awesome. And then we hop back on the freeway, thumbs out, and we get picked up by an old Ford pickup truck. And guys like, hey, you guys look cool, hop on in. So, hop in. It's the middle of the day. And this guy is like driving up there, and we got about like an hour before the border. And he's like, you guys look pretty cool. Like, he's grilling us, asking us questions. Where are you from? Where are you going? What are you doing? And he's like, you guys seem pretty cool. He's like, here's the deal. I'll drive you guys wherever you need to get to in Vancouver, which in this case was my grandmother's house. But I need you to work with me to get over the border. I'm like, yeah, man. I'm like, what do you need? Anything. Like, we're best friends. You're giving us a ride. Like, you're the best guy in the world. He's like, well, you see in the back of the truck back there? Well, I got some Harley parts back there. And, if they catch me declaring those Harley parts going over the border, I'm going to be in big trouble. So I need you guys to like be cool with me. And he's like, let me see your passports. And so Glenn gives him a passport and, American passport. And my passport was actually Canadian because I had a dual citizenship back then. So he's like, oh my God, you're Canadian. He's like, this is the best ever. He's like, wow, my luck is so good. This is great. So we get up to the border, and he's like, hey, just driving back from Seattle with a couple buddies. And it's nothing. We breeze through like it's nothing.
Yeah.
And the guy's just like, whew, sigh of relief. Now, Glenn and I weren't born yesterday. We realized we just helped a guy smuggle auto parts over the border. And then he's like, okay, well, listen, I got to stop by my buddy's house and just stay in the car and don't do anything. Don't get out of the car. Don't move. I'll be right back. Dude's in that house for over a half hour. And Glenn and I are just sitting there like, and at some point we're like, do you think those are really Harley parts that were smuggled in the back there? And we're like, because that house doesn't have any curtains. Like all the curtains are drawn and you can't see anything. And we're like,
Did you check?
Suffice it to say, we made it to my grandmother's house
Hmm.
and we never quite unraveled the mystery of what was in the back of the truck.
Okay. So you never found out?
Never found out.
What do you
What
think
we
was
do
in it?
know is that it was a really sketchy situation, and it seemed like Harley parts in hindsight was probably maybe a little too mellow. So
Mhm.
we've settled on the idea that we were the unsuspecting accomplices of some guy smuggling pounds of marijuana up into Canada or something.
Yeah.
We'll never know.
Mobile meth lab or something. Like,
A couple of kids were just like, we're like, I don't know, this seems kind of weird, don't you think? And
uh-huh.
we had just enough street smart to know that something was wrong, and just enough kind of, I guess, adventure in us not to like get out of the truck and
Yeah.
roll with it. But nah, I never did find out what was back there.
Uh-huh.
But then we get to Alaska. All right, so we had two hella, great adventures to get up to Alaska. And we end up settling in, and you can pay rent. It was like $10 a week to get a giant platform in this spot called Tent City. And all Tent City was a campground. And you basically buy a giant plastic tarp, some PVC tubes, and some nails and screws, and you just build yourself a tent because it rains all the time up there.
Mhm.
So we built ourselves that, and kept going down to the docks, figuring that a boat was going to show up and just hire us on the spot. And after a week, it didn't happen. So we needed money bad. And so I went and took a couple quick construction jobs, like laying rebar and just, doing day labor stuff.
Mhm.
Glenn was doing the same thing. And then we heard a rumor that the local cannery, fishing cannery, was going to hire. So we rolled down there, walked in there, put in an application, hired us on the spot. Just, you're hired. What's our job? Fish gutting. How do you gut a fish? He said, well, the fish cutter's down there, and then the fish comes to you, and you hold this wand with a big knife on the end of it with water that squirts out of it, and you just scrape the middle of the fish, and it rips all the guts out of it and the water jet. So fish guts are flying everywhere.
Yeah.
And we're just like, Glenn's on one side, I'm on the other side. You got a hairnet and like a yellow slicker, and just fish guts flying everywhere, and you're just scraping away. And there's this like little 5'6" menace who was like the floor manager. And all he keeps yelling to everyone is, faster, scrape faster. And we're like 15 minutes into the job, we're like, I fucking hate that guy. I'm scraping this fish. Fish guts are hitting me in the face. And he's going like, you're not going fast enough. Like, motherfucker, I've worked for you for 15 minutes. Give me a break. And we're an hour into this job, and Glenn looks at me and he's like, I can't take it anymore. And I'm like, I can't take it anymore. And he's like, we're quitting. We're quitting right now.
Mhm.
We get up, literally like drop everything on the table, walk up to, like the officey booth area, and they literally had our checks waiting for us. One hour of work at like $15 an hour. Here you go.
Yeah. It's like they just knew you were done. They knew you weren't going to make it.
The minute we put the handles down, they're like, Lake and Doherty, they're done. Checks written. Here you go. Get out of here. Oh man, that was the worst job I have ever had in my life. And I can definitely say that for Glenn as well.
Yeah.
Well, then there was hitchhiking back from Alaska. So
So did you stay the whole summer?
No, we only ended up staying up there for like 3 weeks.
Okay.
And we never got hired on a boat. Like we could never find a boat to hire us. So we end up like the next job was to go down and move to San Francisco and go hang out with Charlie Shannon, who had successfully, laid a career out for himself as the doorman at a microbrewery, despite the fact that Chuck was only 19 years old, because he had a fake ID. And so we decided we would go down, crash on Chuck's floor, and figure out a new career path for ourselves. So the best part of it was we get down to Seattle, like, we do the whole migration down, and Glenn's like, hey, I found this bus line that we can take from Seattle all the way to San Francisco. It's called the Green Tortoise. And Google it. It's a real bus line, and I don't know where their routes are now, but they used to just run the Northwest down to California.
It's another company named after a turtle.
Yeah, there's a pattern developing here. And we literally go to the Green Tortoise, and it's like 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning, and Glenn realizes he lost his wallet. Like, this guy who would go on to have a storied career as a Navy SEAL on the hitchhiking trip to Alaska, loses all of his identification, all of his money, everything, library card, social security card, gone, has no idea where it is. And we've been hitchhiking. So it's like, God knows where it is. And there's no air trackers or anything like that. Like, this shit is gone.
Yeah.
So I'm like, all right, man, I'm relishing in this, right? Because I'm like, well, I have money. I will pay for this.
The bank of Sean.
You, Glenn. I've got you covered here. So we roll up to the bus driver, and this guy's like, long, shaggy hair. Hey, man, like, stoned out of his bejesus belt. And I roll up to him, and I'm like, hey, so we need 2 tickets to San Francisco. And he's like, all right, it's $140. I'm like, no problem. Hand him $100 bill, hand him a 20, couple of 10s, boom, 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 a couple of 5s, whatever it was. And the guy holds this pile of money, my money, in his hands, and he just kind of looks at it and he goes, okay. And he hands me the 100 back. And Glenn kind of goes like this, kind of like speaks up, like, excuse me, and I just shoot him an elbow.
Yeah.
Like, shut up. He hands me a 20 back. And I'm like, you just gave me $120 back on $140 for a $140 bus ride. And he's like, and then he hands me a 5 back. And he's like, I think that's it. I'm like, yep, we're good. Thanks, man. Just take the money, put it in my pocket. I'm like, we just scored for $15, 2 bus tickets from Seattle all the way to San Francisco. Sweet. I'm like, shut the fuck up, Glenn. Like, this is our score. And the only scary part was that guy was our bus driver. So
I was going to say, is this the driver? Yeah.
Next thing you know, we're down in San Francisco, and we both landed a job at the Marin Brew Company. So if anyone out there has ever had a Marin Brewing Company beer, back in the summer of 1991, Glenn and I were your beer bottlers. We literally worked in the back, like with the old school cap, would fill bottles of beer and cap them and put them into case packs. And you had to be 21.
So is this on the Marin side?
This is in Marin County. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. So we would go in from the city and hang out with Charlie Shannon. And then we both got hired there to bottle beer. And literally, like, we gave them fake IDs that we had made in high school.
Because you're
and
20.
They accepted our fake IDs and paid us off of our fake IDs.
So Sean Lake never worked there.
And if you look at my tax records back to 1991, there will be no formal employment. Yet, somehow, I collected a paycheck. So did Glenn. Hey, this is what we did back then. So those are just, a bunch of like those stories. And then, Glenn joined the Navy. And when Glenn was in the Navy, Glenn had the job of being a sniper. And we had one particular Christmas together, right when Glenn was getting out of the Navy, but I think he was still in the Navy. It was like 2006, 2007. And he was house sitting at a buddy's of his, I think Johnny Oliveira's house in Salt Lake City, or Johnny's sister. And he's like, Sean, I got an extra bedroom. I'm like, come on out, man. So I come out there for Christmas in Utah, and we were hosting a couple of people for dinner, and like Glenn's cooking in the kitchen because Glenn loved cooking. Like, it was like the guy in casseroles or roasting a bird or something like that. Like, he just loved being in the kitchen. Like, apron on, towel over his shoulder, chopping up everything. And this is when, like, I think iTunes was just taking off. And so he sets this playlist to be like great holiday music and like some playlists that he had, like early iPod, generation stuff. And he's got it set up on his laptop. And so his laptop's up on the counter because those are the only speakers that we had. And then it's like Glenn's sitting over here, I'm sitting here. And then, like everyone else is sitting around us. And I'm the only one looking towards the laptop, or like it's just off in the background. And we're all sitting down to dinner. It's a great meal. And I kind of glance up and I see that there's a photo album playing. Like somehow Glenn, I don't think he did it on purpose. He just had it synced to where for the songs that were playing, like his iPhoto library would just sort of rotate through. And so there's a photo of like Glenn on the river when he was a river guide, Glenn skiing, friends and family. And then I kind of glance up and I'm like, that's weird. It looked like a mountainscape, like a desert mountainscape. And then we're eating dinner. I glance up again and like, I swear it was like a picture of a giant pool of blood, but like I couldn't quite tell. And then because like, they're kind of flashing.
Yeah.
And then I look up again and it is very clearly a human head that had exploded. Like,
this is during Christmas dinner.
My Christmas dinner. And no one else can see it except for me. But I'm like, huh? And then again, back to another photo. And it's like, Glenn skiing. And it's like beautiful nature shots. And then there's another one. And it's Glenn with a rifle standing over a dead body. And like a couple of his teammates. I'm like, hey, Glenn. And I'm like trying not to make a big deal of it, but I'm like, you think maybe you could ixnay on the auto phase? And he's like, what do you mean, Sean? I'm like, ixnay on the auto phase. He's like, speak English, Sean. What do you want from me? And I'm like, kill the photo show. And he's like, what? And he looks up and he's like, ooh.
It's just the screensaver pulling from his iPhotos or whatever. Yeah.
I'm like, hey man, like, I'm all good with that, but I guarantee you that all the other people around this dinner table would probably lose their marbles.
Yeah.
Over that one. So just good, funny stuff that, he would just do. And like, he's like, well, of course I've got photos of all my kill shots or like my team's kill shots on my computer. Like everyone has that.
Nobody else has those.
Nobody. He wrote a book in 2008, 2009, after he got out of the Navy, called 21st Century Sniper. And I encourage everyone to go out and buy a copy of this book. I
didn't know he wrote one.
Literally, he wrote this book with a guy named Brandon Webb, another SEAL member that he was super close with back then. Glenn wrote a bunch of the book, and Brandon's gift was that he could get anything published. Like he could work the connections. Glenn was the workhorse, who like would do all the writing for it. But yeah, Glenn wrote a book on sniping people. And so then he had all these videos of like long distance sniper shots. And I would, every once in a while, I'd walk into his office and be, oh, what are you working on? He's like, oh man, I'm just trying to finish this chapter in this book. And I would see this video playing in the background, and it would be like, when a bullet goes from a sniper rifle like a half mile away and hits its target, it doesn't just like go through a target. The target fucking explodes, and it's like a pink mist explosion. Like bodies get torn in half. And I didn't know that. Like I had no idea that like, these bullets that are, this big, would do so much damage to a body once hit. But I learned that from watching Glenn's videos, or just like glancing at them.
That's one of those, unless you're in it, why would that come up? Yeah.
No, man, you absolutely wouldn't know. But so the a couple more stories, and then we'll wrap this one up, because again, there's going to be more of these that get unpacked. But
yeah,
I also want to tell the story of Glenn, the CrossFit instructor who taught CrossFit for 4+ years, who never ever had a CrossFit level 1 certification. Slight oversight. on behalf of every gym that
Hey,
he
hold
ever
on.
worked with.
He never had his level 1. He was an instructor, or he was an instructor, quote unquote. He has a workout named after him.
Yeah. I'm going to out Glenn right now. He never, ever, ever got his level 1 cert. He just never bothered. He's like, what? I don't need that. He's like, I know how to do these movements. I don't need some piece of paper to tell me how to do that. He's like, I'm going to game this one as long as possible. And truly,
He won.
he did. He won. He won the game. Like it's amazing. I'm like, he would always have these little hacks where he'd be like, look, I've already done the work. Like I know how to do it.
Hmm.
And, when Mark Devine had Seal Fit, he just had Glenn coach. I think Mark just naturally assumed that Glenn had his level 1 coach's cert because Glenn was so good. Get into a room full of people, command their respect, articulately take them through workout progressions, and get them through the workout. Like he was gifted, just never certified. So there's that. And then, so I always like to dime him out for that one. Never having ever gotten his teaching certificates.
That's fun.
And like literally, you think about that. You're like, wait a second, like, aren't you supposed to have a piece of paper? So,
little diploma.
Just something
Yeah.
to say they just. And yes, he's got a workout named after him, and he taught for years, in CrossFit gyms. So I think it's classic. So again, a ton more stories. The last scammy story that is kind of funny that I'm going to tell you is, at one point, Glenn went to the doctor's office for a routine visit and noticed that doctors have these stamps, like where they sign their names but you have to have an official doctor's stamp.
Mhm.
And during one of his office visits, now keep in mind, Glenn was a corpsman in the Navy, so he had all of his medical certifications, to, treat patients, first responder, all that stuff, EMT.
Mhm.
And he had to maintain those certifications for various duties. During one of those doctor's visits, somehow that stamp ended up at our house. I don't know how. In fact, I didn't even know it was there until one time Glenn was away on deployment and he hits me up and he's like, hey, I got a favor for you. I'm like, what's that? He's like, that stamp that's in my office? And I'm like, yeah, I'll find it. What? He's like, I need you to take that stamp and the little ink pad that it's with. I need you to mail it to one of my coworkers. Gave me the name, and I'm going to omit his name because I've already dimed him out before. I'm not going to do it this time. And just mail it to him. I'm like, why, Glenn? Why would I mail a doctor's stamp and seal to one of your coworkers, Glenn? That seems highly unethical, Glenn. Tell me why, Glenn. He's like, look, we've all taken this test. We've all been certified. We all know what we're doing. Just we're busy. We don't have time to deal with this shit. So just send the stamp. And I'm like, it's going to cost you, Glenn. So I send the stamp. And, the guy had a very unique name. And I'll never forget it because years later, when Glenn died, that guy showed up at my doorstep to tell me that Glenn had passed. And he had such a unique name.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like this amazing moment of lightness and brevity during a very serious moment, because he's showing up at my doorstep with several members of the CIA to tell me that, Glenn, Navy SEAL hero, died in action, saving all those American lives in Benghazi. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, I know you. And he's like, you do? And I'm like kind of leaning into him so that no one else can hear. I'm like, yeah, I'm the guy who sent you that doctor's stamp. He's like, that was you? Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Got me out of a bind.
Again, horrible circumstances, but that was Glenn, man. Just bringing people together and tying it all together. And again, there's countless examples of those, but for today's purposes, I wanted to share those few just from different ranges of our lives.
Yeah. No, and that's been one of my favorite parts about doing the podcast is I know a lot of the ones where it's been former team members and stuff of Glenn's, it's been you one-on-one with those, but they've just been really good stories to listen to. So I wanted to I would love to bring on like another childhood friend or a couple childhood friends and do like a little round table with some of them.
Oh, we
Of
will.
yeah, it
Yeah,
was kind of
we
cool on some of
100%
these,
will.
like hearing you where it's like you're hearing stories of things that he did for the first time. And it's been kind of cool to watch. And you're like, oh, and you can see you putting puzzle pieces together of you're like, that, okay, like this story actually makes this make more sense that you heard 10 years ago kind of thing. So,
Yeah. Fun
yeah.
stuff, man. It's super fun stuff.
Mhm.
So yeah, those are my Glenn stories for this edition of the Culture Rec podcast.
Yeah. And we'll do more of these in the future. This one was fun. I know I just kind of sat back and let you talk, but like I like these stories. So I'm gonna do the outro, Sean. I've got the one actually pulled up from Jimmy Letchford.
Well,
So uh,
hold on. Aren't you going to ask me where people can find me?
I say, so Jimmy, I mean Sean, thanks for joining us today. If people want to learn more about where to find you and what you're doing, where should they go?
Oh, well, on social media, I run by Slako at Slakeo. But really, just go to Bubs Naturals and bubsnaturals.com for all of our social. And did I mention we also have a handful of products designed to help you defy the aging process? Or, as I like to say, die young as late as possible?
Perfect. That's a good sign off. Guys, thanks for listening. If you're on podcast services or whatever, give us a thumbs up, give us a 5-star. Every positive review helps. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.